As I said, it's a lively group, and it's great to have you all here. We have Commissioner Ed Davis here with us, and he is on a very tight time frame. So I do have some introductory remarks, but I'm going to hold them until we've had Commissioner Davis and probably our next guest speak, and then I'll come back to it, because I'd love to have you meet all the staff here in Washington, as well as those that are here having come up from the district. I would love to have you have that opportunity as well. So it really is my honor to have Commissioner Ed Davis here. I have known him for too many years. We won't go into that, but since his early days walking the beat in Lowell, Massachusetts. Rising to become Lowell's police chief, he helped to turn around our city and make possible an era of growth rooted in community policing. We hated to see him go to Boston, but we were so proud of him when he left to become the city's police commissioner, and we are even more proud of him now. As we approach the one-year anniversary of the Boston Marathon, we are reminded of Commissioner Davis's extraordinary professionalism, his leadership, and competence. He was such a calming influence in a time of great chaos and crisis, and he earned the appreciation of our entire country. So I'm so grateful that he took the time to be with us today. He has to go on and testify before the Committee on Homeland Security about the Boston Marathon bombings. So he is on a tight schedule, but we are so glad he's joining us today. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner Ed Davis.
Thank you. Thank you and good morning. I appreciate that introduction, Congresswoman. It's a pleasure to be here. I try to get all of my Washington dates all put in the same day so that I can get it all over. This is very unusual to have this happen. I was so looking forward to visiting with all of you and to making this a full day, but unfortunately it's not in the cards for me. So I'm going to say a few words and then take some questions, and then I will sneak out the door and try to make my hearing. This is going to be a lot more fun than my hearing, just so you know. I don't know if you've ever been questioned by Congress, but it's an interesting place, and there's always a lot of questions. So I'm actually looking forward to it, and you know, at this juncture, 1 year after all we've been through, it's nice to see some closure occurring on all of the studies that are occurring, the after-action reports, the various media situations that have occurred, and the interest that they have in this particular incident. It actually is, I feel like after we get over this hump, we'll be able to put it behind us a little bit. But it's really about the victims. You know, I mean, there were 250 people whose lives were altered permanently by these acts of these two cowards that blew up the city of Boston. And I've had a chance to get to meet a lot of the victims over the last year. Some of them within hours or days of the incident occurring. And so I really am focused on their healing and on their resiliency. It really is amazing to see the way that they have reacted to this challenge that's been placed before them. And the lack of self-pity, the lack of feeling sorry for themselves is just amazing to me. They've moved on. Some of them have done remarkable things. And, you know, I think about Jeff Bowman particularly. I'm going to speak about him in a few minutes. Jeff over at the hearing. Jeff really is the epitome of courage. As we were standing in the command post, we were getting reports within the first half an hour to 45 minutes that one of the victims was speaking at the hospital and that he had actually seen someone who he thought was the bomber. And in the final analysis, he had come face to face with Tamala, the older brother, the one who had set off the first bomb right at the Marathon Sports. And Jeff was giving my officers, my detectives, and the FBI agents who were in the hospital room with him a very good description of the suspect, literally while the doctors were amputating what was left of his legs. So, I'm sorry, I'm just getting over a little cold here, so bear with me. So, his incredible courage and skill of observation helped us in the very first few hours of the investigation and made us believe that with the number of people that were there, with the number of photographs and video that was being taken, that we would be able to wrap this investigation up very quickly. And so that's really a tribute to him and this whole concept of Boston Strong, I think, plays through this whole thing. You know, the Congresswoman mentioned Lowell, and when I started there in 1993 and 1994 as the new police chief, I used to get phone calls from Paul Tsongas. And so you have a United States Senator that's running for president, and he's stopping by my office to talk about deployment in the downtown area and how many police officers we had in Kearny Square and things like that, what was happening in the acre. Much to the chagrin of his presidential staff, the campaign staff, who were very upset at him when he was calling me from Iowa to talk about police work in downtown Kearny Square as he was in the middle of his campaign. So I'll never forget that. Paul was an incredible force in Lowell, and really built a foundation for the city to flourish. And even in the middle of all of these international and incredibly important national issues that he was working on, he always had the time to touch base and to reach out, and it made a significant difference in my ability to get things done in the city. He was the first one that came to me and said, you need to establish a goal. You need to set a goal and tell your officers and the community that you want to reach this goal. And we did that. And it was because of his advice that happened. We set a goal to reduce crime by 10% that first year, which was a remarkable goal to set because crime had gone up by 10% almost every year before that. So there would be a 20% shift in the numbers as we considered this. Bill Taylor is here, the new police superintendent. Bill was part of my kitchen cabinet when we were kicking this around, and you know, we all thought this was a stretch goal, to say the least. But we accomplished it. We got it done because everybody pulled in the same direction. And I think that's the lesson, the most important lesson, after we've looked at the marathon that I can sort of put out to you. It's about putting egos at the door. It's about working across silos of responsibility and making sure that the job gets done. And really paying attention to planning. You know, I mean, one of the big lessons that we learned here, if we hadn't planned, if we hadn't gone through exercises where we were forced to think the unthinkable, we would not have been able to respond to this incident the way we did. So the planning was really important. But I see some military people here, and I know that you guys all have a phrase that basically goes like this: no plan survives its first encounter with the enemy. Okay, and I think that's absolutely true, and it played itself out on the streets of Boston. So planning requires planning and innovation. It requires giving people the ability to do things that aren't in the playbook and supporting them to make sure that the outcome is appropriate. So we're learning all of these things. There's going to be a lot of conversation about that over at the hearing at 10 o'clock. So I want to talk about lessons learned. I wanted to talk about, you know, sort of how we're moving on from this. There's been some incredible people that have been supporting the police department and the victims. And we have a lot of victims, PTSD people inside the police department. You know, this was really a battlefield scene. Even you know, hardened veterans of homicide investigations had never seen anything like this. So there was a significant amount of response that was necessary to keep our officers on this, you know, on the road to the psychological health in the future. And so all of that stuff played a role in our planning right from the very minute that we walked into that command post. We were calling in crisis experts and PTSD experts to work with the officers. But in spite of the fact that we thought that we had that checked off, we didn't have enough resources to do that. And when an article got in the newspaper on a Sunday morning, I got a call at my home from Gary Gottlieb, who was the president of Partners Healthcare. And Gary said to me, whatever you need, we will provide you. So we established a very tight relationship with Partners and McLean Hospital, and they've been helping the officers over the last year, putting first responders and some victims back on the road to psychological well-being. So you've got people that lost legs, you've got people that were affected by this thing psychologically, you've got people that lost hearing. There were a lot of people that we didn't even factor in. When we first got there, the report that we got was Dick Donahue was unrelated. He's at the hospital, but he's going to die. Thankfully, he got them out of the hospital very quickly, and they were able to, through some great Massachusetts hospital surgeons, they were able to put it back together. At about this time, as Dick is getting hit, probably by friendly fire, a sergeant who was off duty, he just come from the detail. He actually was working a theater job. So he left the theater job, he was going home, and his family came. And he hears the calls for help, so he just comes around the corner in his own personal vehicle. He pulls up and he sees what's happening. So, former military officer, he flanks the position of the suspect. So he pulls up to Laurel and Dexter, goes around one of the houses, and comes up on the immediate 90-degree angle to the suspect. And he starts to exchange shots with the suspect. This is Sergeant's first name is Joe. Joe and Tamerlan Tsarnaev have a 6-foot firefight that occurs between them until Tamerlan fires the lockback. He empties his weapon. Joe sees that he's emptied his weapon, and he starts to charge him, tackles him to the ground. Tamerlan now has been shot 9 times. Joe went back to the scene and stood where he was standing, and they took pictures of him standing there where he was involved in the firefight. And there was a house right behind him. With no windows, there was a house, just a glass house. And they went back and they looked at where the rounds hit. Literally, they hit all around on both sides. Joe was able to tackle Tamerlan to the ground. And he's trying to handcuff him. And he looks up and he sees a vehicle coming at them at a high rate of speed. So the brother jumped into a second car and drove back Joe as he was trying to handcuff the suspect. Joe says to me when I get to the scene, Commissioner, I tried to get him out of the way. I tried to drag the suspect out of the road so that he wouldn't get hit by the brother. He said, but he was too heavy, I couldn't pull him. And then finally, at the last second, I threw myself out of the way. He literally just missed the wheel of the car with his head. He ended up, the police officer ended up falling on the ground. And he said, I had sort of a ground-eye view of the vehicle hitting Tamerlan's body, the front wheels going over it, and him getting caught up behind the rear wheels and dragged about 70 or 80 feet down the street. The brother had to stop the vehicle and back up over Tamerlan so that he could get away. Despite nine bullet holes and that kind of dragging injury that occurred, Tamerlan was still fighting with the EMT on the gurney. So, hearing that story, it really is an incredible story about courage under fire, about working outside the policies and procedures. With Eddie, the moment I got there, I got the call while the chase, literally just at the very beginning of the firefight, my chief of the department called me and said they're shooting at us and throwing bombs. So I could hear the shooting in the background. I get in my car and drove to the water tower. And when you drive about 1,000 miles an hour, it only takes about 10 minutes to get to the water tower. There's the water tower really quick. So Ed DeVoe and I are standing on the street corner with these 3 guys, the 3 cops. And the cops are looking at us. And first of all, they're confused. Why is Ed Davis standing in a water tower? And one of the sergeants said, who the hell are these guys? Like, it wasn't connecting as to the bigger picture, And so we said they were the bombers, and the sergeant went, of course they're the bombers, they threw bombs at us. That's what he said about it. The young kid, David, who was the first contact officer, I pulled him in and I said, listen, David, we've got to talk to you about exactly what you saw, and exactly the last minute you saw the suspect, because we've got to set up a perimeter, so we've got to do some figuring here, okay? We've got to do some math about how far we can go and what kind of perimeter we're going to set up. So he starts to recount what happened to him. And while he's talking, there's unexploded ordnance on the ground at our feet. I mean, there's literally some of these bombs didn't go off. They had a pressure cooker bomb, they had these little hand grenades, but some of them had not gone off. So we're having this conversation in kind of a very dangerous area. But nobody cared at that point in time because our sole motivation was to get this guy. And so as he's telling me the story, David's telling me the story, he's getting excited, and he stops talking to me. He's apologizing. I said, Commissioner, I'm sorry. I'm all excited. I don't know why I can't tell you this story. He said, David, don't apologize. This is going to be the toughest thing you've ever been through in your life. We got to get the details out. Just take it slow. So David turns around to the moment. He says, Chief, you're going to be really mad at me. And then he says, why? And he said, well, Chief, I was getting shot at, so I put the car in drive and I just like let it ride down the street and it hit a telephone pole. I mean, it's really badly damaged. So he said, I'm going to hug you. I don't want to, So those were some of the inside, kind of observations that occurred at that terrible situation. But the bottom line is, it showed incredible strength. It showed innovation from planning and deviation from policy, but things that actually work. And it also showed that ultimately we prevailed and we're stronger now than we were before. So maybe there's some questions. I know I don't have a lot of time. Okay. Yes.
So you talked about reducing crime and mold by 10%. Can you just briefly say your strategy, how you did that?
Sure. It was community policing, briefly. Police a big advocate of it. Basically, it's getting police officers out of police cars and focused on prevention and not just arresting people. For a long time, we only measured officers' ability on their prosecution rate and how many people that they locked up. And that doesn't work. I mean, you have to do that every once in a while, but that's not the answer to the crime problem. The answer to the crime problem is identifying where crime is going to occur and putting officers there beforehand, preferably on foot, not in police cars, so that they can work with the community and deal with the problems a little bit.
So you're saying getting tough on crime and throwing people in jail doesn't work. You have to get smart on crime.
Right. Yeah, essentially. Yeah. I gotta take you with me. Thank you all very much.
Well, you can see how fortunate Boston was to have Commissioner Davis in charge in such challenging times, and how fortunate Lowell, Massachusetts has been to have him as its police chief, because the kind of growth that's happened there would not have been possible without the fact we have a safe city. So it's great to have our commissioner here. It's now my pleasure to introduce Congressman Adam Smith, who serves as the highest-ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, on which I also serve, and I'm honored to serve alongside him. He is serving in his 9th term representing the 9th District of Washington State, which includes the densely populated central Puget Sound region from Bellevue to Tacoma. In 2012, Congressman Smith came to Massachusetts and joined me in visiting Hanscom Air Force Base and MIT Lincoln Labs, where he was able to see firsthand the remarkable work being done in Massachusetts. As we've served together on armed services, I've appreciated his steadfast and courageous leadership. He is committed to providing our military personnel with the best equipment available to keep them safe and to carry out their current and future missions, yet he also understands that in constrained fiscal times, we need to use our resources wisely to make sure our national and economic security is secured, and be willing to make some very difficult choices. Please welcome me in joining Congressman and welcoming Ed.
It's great to be here, and I really enjoyed my time in Congressman Saunders' district back in 2012. She is a fabulous member of the Armed Services, and he really understands the issues. And her district sort of brings together two things that I've been working on since I first got involved in Congress. One, of course, is national security policy, as mentioned with Hanscom, and with all the technology and innovation that is there. And that's the second thing. Tech and innovation has been a huge part of what I work on. I don't actually represent the Microsoft campus, but they're right across the street. And they do have 7,000 employees in the city of Bellevue, which I do represent. And the incredible importance of technology and innovation, both for the future of our economy and jobs, which I know is enormously important to Nikki, and also to the future of our national security. Basically, we need smart, innovative people like you have in her district, who are going to come up with the new ideas, the new inventions that are both going to create jobs in the future and also help provide for our national security. So, hey, it's an honor to be here, an honor to have her on the committee. Now, we do have a challenge, and that's the main thing that I want to talk about, and that is sequestration and the devastation that has happened to our budget, most notably to our discretionary budget in the last 3 or 4 years. Now, as the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, I'm most familiar with the impact that it has on national security as we go forward. You know, for 3 or 4 years there, we did not have a budget on a regular basis. The government shut down at one point. Now, finally, we got a budget agreement in December, but that's only for 2014 and 2015. We still have on the books, as law, 8 years of sequestration starting in 2016. And the impact that that will have on the infrastructure of this country and the national security of this country, I believe, will be devastating. And keep in mind, it's not just the military stuff. Certainly you can see the bases that are vulnerable. You can see the industrial base that is going to be vulnerable if we're not building as many ships, as many tanks, as many planes as we used to. But the discretionary budget also includes infrastructure, innovation, and research. It includes the very things that give rise to the inventions and the innovation that help grow our economy. The public-private partnership, which is really exemplified in your district, becomes vastly more difficult if the public side of that is no longer able to provide money. And we are talking about hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars that will be cut from all of those budgets if we don't do something about sequestration. So during this little lull here in 2014 and 2015, when we're actually passing appropriations bills, we can't forget what is coming. Now, I'll tell you, I've served on the Armed Services Committee long enough to know there is no question that we can cut money from the Department of Defense in an efficient and effective way. In fact, you can make a pretty powerful argument that you can cut the budget over there 10% and make it better. Now, the problem, of course, is that there is no bureaucracy like the Department of Defense bureaucracy, so making sure you cut the right 10% would be a little bit of a challenge. But we can get more efficient, we can get more effective. We can't really deal with 20% cuts year after year 10% cuts year after year in our national security budget. My hope is that we can put together a sensible budget for the next 10 years, one that reflects the fact that, yes, we're not going to be able to spend the $700 billion a year that we were spending a few years ago. It's going to be a lower number, but it's going to be a smarter number, it's going to be more efficient, it's going to be more effective, and it's not going to be under the axe of sequestration, which mindlessly across the board cuts these incredibly important programs. Look, the discretionary budget, as far as I'm concerned, is the seed corn of our society. It's education, it's innovation, it's research, it's transportation. It is the national security budget, which not only protects our country, but a lot of the money that is invested there goes into innovation and technology as well. So what sequestration does right now is it kills the seed corn of our economy. And I will say, well, what do we do about this? We have a deficit. We just ignore the deficit. No, I don't believe we can. I do think and have loudly argued for raising taxes. I know that's the kind of thing you're not supposed to say, but considering the fact that we cut taxes by $7 trillion over the course of the last 12 years, and the people at the very, very high end of the economic scale benefited most from that, and have never had more concentrated wealth in this country than they have right now, it seems to me like a reasonable trade-off. If we want to stand up and rail against all of the cuts to national security, you got to provide the money. And the only place that I can see to find money, aside from some reasonable efficiencies, is to be more reasonable about raising revenues. I personally think that the Clinton-era tax rates worked pretty darn well for this country, for the wealthy and for everybody else. We don't have to go back that far. but we can go back at least a little way so we can begin to invest in the infrastructure. Because again, not just national security. You can drive across this country, you can see the roads, the bridges, the airports falling in disrepair in need of improvement. We need those resources. So the greatest challenge we face in the Armed Services Committee going forward is sequestration and the impact of that. Now, as it happens, there's a couple other little problems going on in the world. Ukraine, the Middle East peace process, Iran, North Korea, China,
Syria.
what Russia is doing, Syria, and on and on. And we'd like to be in the best possible position to deal with those. I'll say one more thing about that, and then take a couple of questions. I definitely think the U.S. needs to be actively engaged in the world, but I also think that we need to start setting the right expectation. I do not want the United States of America to be the policeman for the world for a couple of reasons. Number one, we can't. You just can't effectively do that. The world is too big, too diverse for one country to show up and fix problems. I want us to be an actively engaged part of the solution, to work with partners and local communities in different parts of the world that face these challenges, to work with the EU. In the case of Africa, where we face a threat from Al-Qaeda and affiliated groups, to work with partner nations there to confront that threat. I think that's a smarter policy. I don't think it's smart and effective to drop well over 100,000 U.S. troops down into a country and think that if we just stay there long enough, we will fix it. That won't happen. But we can work with partners to contain national security threats to us and to the various regions of the world that are important to us. So I think those are some of the changes in strategy that we need. This is an exciting time. In some ways, it's an opportunity. With the budget shrinking, we're going to have to be smarter about the way we spend money. One of my all-time favorite quotes, I attribute it to Winston Churchill. I confess somebody told me it was Winston Churchill, and I never actually looked it up. So I assume it is. Who said, gentlemen, we're out of money, now we need to think. Enormous amount of sympathy for that outlook. I hope we start doing it. I hope we don't mindlessly cut. I hope we look at the budget challenges and say, here's an opportunity to make smart, efficient changes to the way we do business at the Department of Defense before doing that. Your Congresswoman is a critical part of that. The great thing about the Armed Services Committee is it's the most bipartisan committee in Congress. I will grant you very low bar to jump over these days. But we do actually work together to produce a product, and I think may make a real difference. And Nikki's been a great part of that. So I'm honored to be here with her congressional district. I do one of these every year as well. 9th District Day. We're a little bit further away, so we don't draw quite such a crowd. We'll envious. But I think it's a great idea, because what it does is it really gives an opportunity for her constituents to come down and see what's going on here, hear from different people and different aspects of it. I think it's a wonderful thing to do. I'm happy to take one or two questions. I have to go complain about big gossip here. It's yes, that is still with us, but I'll take one or two. Yes, sir.
How do you see lowering the defense budget? It seems like it keeps getting bigger, and it's bigger than many of the world's countries' GDP. What action can be taken for it?
Well, it's been lowered quite a bit. At its peak, I think it was 2010, it was over $700 billion. It's now down to just over 6. And it is coming down. It will continue to come down both as sequestration kicks in and as the so-called OCO, the Overseas Contingency Operations, which was the money that's supposed to be for Iraq and Afghanistan, now just Afghanistan. They kind of sort of pad that with some other things. But those numbers are coming down. The defense budget is coming down. One way or the other, sequestration or no sequestration. It is already at a substantially lower figure, and it will. And I agree. If we're going to get the deficit under control, part of that is spending less money on defense than we had contemplated that we were going to spend. And as I've argued, I think we can do that and still have a very strong, robust national security. That's the direction we're going to have to go in. Thanks. Yes.
Congressman, first, a small compliment. I served with the second best medical unit in the U.S. Army, the 47th Attack Hospital out of the state of Washington. So, bravo, good job.
Yours would be the best.
Absolutely, the 804 Medical Brigade. But the Congresswoman has taken on many challenges, and one of them directly relates to your mission and others. Maybe you could let us know how we can help you make sure that the cuts don't come down to the soldiers. We lost our quality boots. As you know, the Air Force had better boots than the Army. Body armor had been an issue. And it seems that as we cut the budget, we cut the soldier budget and not the bureaucratic budget. What can we do to help?
Well, it's bureaucratic. The biggest thing we can do to help is there have been proposals out of the Pentagon to make cuts in a variety of different programs. And the primary aim of that is to protect readiness, because that's really what you're talking about. And what readiness is training, maintenance, and equipment for the men and women serving, to make sure that they get the training they need, have the equipment they need, and it's maintained to the degree that they can use it. And the problem is, if you don't make cuts in other parts of the budget, the last thing standing is readiness. The easiest thing to cut is to say, well, look, we're going to save money on fuel, you're not going to fly as many hours, you're not going to train. We're not going to buy as much ammunition for you to train, we're not going to fix that building, we're not going to fix that tank because we don't have the money. And in this year's budget, there are some very particular items that the Pentagon has picked out that I think make a lot of sense. The Army is reorganizing both its air assets and the distribution between it and the Guard. They're moving helicopters around. It's incredibly complicated, but it saves $12 billion. Now, some of those helicopters come out of states that would rather not lose them. I get that. They will argue about that. They're also deciding to retire the A-10 sooner than they originally had. The A-10 is scheduled to be retired. The F-35 is going to replace it. They're doing it sooner. I'm sorry, the A-10 is a fighter attack plane, and it, basically, that's what it is. The F-35 is supposed to do everything. You have three versions of the F-35, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps. It's supposed to be able to be, a fighter and attack plane as well, but it's more stealthy, it's faster, it's harder to hit. It's fifth generation. A-10 is third generation. And that saves $3.5 billion. And moving around with helicopters saves $12 billion. There are 11 cruisers that the Navy would like to take out of service and refurbish. That saves $4 billion. There are constituencies that are opposed to every single one of those moves. They're also saving some money on personnel costs by increasing health care costs for people who serve in the military to some degree. There's opposition to all of that. But if we don't do that, what do? We cut readiness. So the easiest thing you can do is realistically look at our budget and not say, gosh, I wish we had more money. We don't. This is what we have. Live with it. Block the Pentagon from making those decisions. The thing that will get hurt is readiness, and then you will have the hollow force that everybody keeps saying that we should not have. We'll protect all of these things, but we won't be training and equipping people in our teams. One more question that I really do have for you. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things you could potentially do is use small business, and yet the services never meet their small business percentages that they're supposed to, and things like the Rapid Innovation Fund keeps getting cut, SBIR Fund keeps getting cut, so any thoughts on that?
No, I agree completely. It is very, very difficult to do business with the Pentagon. Something that I work on, and Nikki works on all the time, because she has a lot of these small, innovative companies in her district, as I do in mine, is we try to bridge that gap. We try to help them do business with the Pentagon, in part, obviously, to help our local companies, but also in part to help the Pentagon, to get access to better, quicker, more efficient technologies. And a lot of times, it's, the smaller new kid on the block that comes up with a better idea, but they don't have the staff that a Boeing or a Lockheed or a General Dynamics has to get access to it. I'm working with Congressman Matt Thornberry, who's the vice chair of the committee on acquisition reform, on how do we look at this and how do we make some fixes. And one of the number one biggest ideas is buying more commercial off-the-shelf technology. Don't rely on the huge big-ticket programs. Look at what's out there. Buy from the innovative companies that can help us the most. So, thank you. You have a fabulous Congresswoman. Keep sending her that.
You can see why it's such an honor to serve with Adam Smith as our ranking member. And to his point, and to Sam Holton's point about readiness, the real issue, it's a term of art, really, as Congressman Smith described it, but to get to a place where you're really compromising the ability of our soldiers to fight and do so in as well-protected, as well-trained way as possible is actually a moral issue as much as it is a financial issue. And so we have got to find a way forward that brings sufficient resources in a thoughtful way into the federal budget so that we're not making the kind of decision that puts people at risk unfairly. So, tough time. I'd like to take this moment now. We have a little break. Congressman Smith had to go off and sort of fight the Benghazi fight. To now, thank you all, welcome you here, and invite my staff up so that I can introduce all of them to you so you know who's who. So first, this is Katie Enos, who is my chief of staff. Is housed in primarily out of Lowell, makes frequent trips this way, but very accessible in the Lowell office. Sarah Christopherson, who is, okay, they're coming around. I'll give them all a moment to make their way. So first in line here is Sarah Christopherson, who's our Washington manager and legislative director. And what we do in the office is sort of assign topic areas to different staff members so that they can develop, they have interest and develop an expertise. So Sarah oversees all of the legislative staff, but also monitors issues, legislation related to our budget, taxes, and commerce. Modest, simple little things. Michael Hardigan, who is our, here is Michael, right there, our communications director. It's been great to have him come on board. Sean Duggan, where's Sean? Right there, is our military legislative assistant. So as a member of the Armed Services Committee, I do have one staff member whose sole job primarily is to monitor all the work that comes through the Armed Services Committee, and as well as the work we do on the intelligence side of things. So it's great to have Sean. He's very busy now because we will be marking up. The Armed Services Committee produces one bill a year. It's the Defense Authorization Bill, and it encompasses the whole of how we go about protecting our country. So we're about to mark it up early May. So Sean's pretty busy. Sarah Alderson, who's a legislative counsel with a focus on health, education, civil rights, but also has been the lead person that I work with as we've dealt with the issue of sexual assault in the military and military sexual trauma, who's been invaluable and great to work with. Becky Carnes, who is our legislative assistant, energy, environment, and transportation. I'm also on the Natural Resources Committee, which oversees our federal lands, and that will include 200 miles offshore and all the regulation we do of our fisheries, the management of our national parks, the management of our forests, whatever federal lands that we have the oversight of. So Becky is the lead staff person for me on all of that. Bob Schneider, who's here, who's a legislative correspondent. All the letters and thousands of letters that we answer every year, Bob has to make sure we have a sane, reasonable, readable answer. So if you have any complaints about any letter, Bob is the problem. George A., where's George, is my scheduler, executive assistant. So as you send in requests for me to do various things, it all funnels through George, and every day he gives me a lineup of what I have to do, when I have to do it. So great to have George. And then every year we get a congressional fellow from one of the services. And this year we have Major Tom Helfrich, who's the U.S. Air Force. Oh, excuse me, Tim, I'm sorry. Yeah, Tim, I do know your name. Who's been great. I mean, we've had some wonderful experiences with our congressional fellows who are in the services, active duty, who bring real insight as to how the services work, so that we're just not sort of at sea as we're civilians. But despite the fact that I did grow up in the Air Force, there's a lot I don't know. Now on the district staff side, as you probably know, we have an office in Lowell, but we have remote office hours in Lawrence, Haverhill, Marlboro, and Fitchburg. So we spend some time every week. We have a staff member who spends some time every week in those communities. And I have a few members here today who are from the district offices. So Chris Mullen, right over here, who's district director, and works with Katie Enos, but essentially oversees all the work that we do in the district. When we have district work periods where I spend a more concerted period of time back in Massachusetts, we have we put all that time to good use, and it's the opportunity I have to get out and see what's going on and connect with so many of you, and Chris helps manage that. And June Black, who is our Constituent Services Director, and also my Regional Director for Essex County. Constituent services are very important. That's where people come to us who have a problem with the federal government. It might be Social Security, it might be Medicare, it might be veterans, it might be immigration, whatever it may be. And we take that role very, very seriously, because if people don't get the help they need, you know, it just contributes to that sense that Congress is not doing its job. So we're very focused on that, as we are on economic development, and those who work on economic development are back in Massachusetts. But again, given the nature of this district, we feel that Congress has to be an engaged partner, and the congressperson has to be an engaged partner on economic development in all the communities. So it's a great staff to have. I feel very fortunate to have every single one of them, despite what I say. So we have a great lineup of speakers. We're going to be waiting for our next one, but in the interim, we did invite Secretary of State John Kerry, and who's been, as our senator, came every time we held a 3rd District Day or 5th District Day. But this year, instead, he wrote a letter, and it was very nice, so I wanted to read it. So he wrote, "Dear Nikki, thank you for the invite to 3rd District Day. You're great to think of me, and I'd have really loved the chance to stop by and see some familiar faces. Believe me, these days I mostly see the inside of an airplane. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make it this year. The schedule largely has me on the road, but I hope you'll think of me again next time, and that you'll say hello to everyone for me. Being away from Massachusetts in our delegation is something I'll never quite get used to. Thanks for keeping the tradition alive, and I hope you're going to import some Sal's Pizza in for the big day. We're all going to go to Sal's when we're back in Massachusetts. Hope we can catch up soon. Sincerely, John F. Kerry." So I just thought that was such a nice letter that it was worth reading. And I think we have a little break now until our next speaker, I think, is due to be here shortly. So people can either just stay in their seats and we'll wait a little bit, or take this moment to get something to drink or something more to eat. I wanted you all to know that we are live streaming this entire day. And Faisal Siddiqui, who is our Systems Administrator, is in charge of that. He works in my office and works across a couple of other offices, but it's great that we're able to do this, and it will be on our website in the coming days. So if anybody has an interest in using this somehow, it will be on the website. So now it's my honor to introduce my colleague, Mike Capuano. Mike is serving his 8th term in Congress, representing Massachusetts 7th District, which includes, among other things, Somerville, half of Cambridge, and approximately 75% of Boston. Prior to serving in Congress, Mike was the mayor of Somerville for 9 years, so he knows, and we have a few mayors here, Mike, just for your information. He said he loves them all. He's a member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, the Committee on Financial Services, and he was named to the House Ethics Committee in 2013. It's not a simple thing to do. Shortly after being elected, I was able to support the creation of an independent office of congressional ethics, which Mike played the lead role in developing. And it is not a simple thing, as he said, because the office has the power to investigate potentially unethical behavior by members of Congress. So Mike understands how critical it is that the public has confidence that elected officials are being held to the highest ethical standards, and that a bright light shines on all congressional activities, however unsettling and difficult that process may be. And I can tell you it is very difficult when a member is going through an ethics investigation. So please join me in welcoming the ever-passionate, outspoken Mike Capuano.
I'm going to leave my jacket off because I hate this weather and I haven't broken out my short sleeve shirts yet. That's next week probably. First of all, welcome. And I asked Nikki, what did she want me to talk about? She said, whatever you want. I said, fine, but that'll get you in trouble. And so therefore, if you don't like what I say, don't blame her. And you can shut that videotape off anytime you want. I think I'm just going to talk a minute about what I see is happening down here in Washington. I know that a lot of my constituents, I presume many of you, are frustrated with our lack of ability to get things done. And if you just listen to the media, especially some of the things on TV, you'll think it's because we don't like each other, that we just vote different ways because we have certain letters after our names. You know, that is a really overly simplified version of life that really doesn't play into it as I see it. I mean, again, I do have a letter after my name, but that's because of my philosophies. It doesn't mean I embrace everything that somebody might think a Democrat might believe in. It's because I have a general philosophy, and there are two parties in the country, and I picked one, to be perfectly honest. It was closer to my opinion. It doesn't mean I go lockstep with them. I do tend to agree, in general, with so-called Democratic principles as opposed to so-called Republican ones. But that's really not the issue. The issue is that when I've been in government now, directly and indirectly, all my adult life, and I've always prided myself on my willingness and ability to compromise. Now, that doesn't mean I actually like when you introduce me as passionate, because I am. I have deep, serious beliefs in many important issues. But I know that I wasn't elected emperor. And I actually like to take this opportunity to tell you that if the job opens up, I'm running. And if I win, the world will be fine. But absent that, I have to live in a world of compromise, just like everyone else does every day. I've been married for 40 years. Every day is a compromise for me, not for my wife. I can say that because she's not here. Everybody compromises, every single minute of every single day. And I don't think it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean I don't have principles. It means here are my principles, what are yours, what can we get done? It means I have to give up something. And, you know, there's a line where you don't cross, but everybody does it, personal, business, everywhere. And yet, for reasons that I cannot comprehend, and I don't really understand, but I believe them to be true, there are too many members of Congress who have run on the promise of never compromising. They run for office and say, you elect me and I will stick to my principles, period. No compromise on these 10 issues. And then they get here and they don't compromise. Why are you surprised? When I ran, when Nikki ran, I told you what I was going to do. She's told you what she was going to do. And we do it, for the most part. We have to compromise. And then we go and say, well, yeah, I had to make this deal. Healthcare is a classic example. All my life, I've wanted to expand healthcare for as many people as possible. I don't really like the healthcare bill we have, but I voted for it proudly. Why? Because it was a step in the right direction, in my opinion, to cover more people. I knew there were problems in it when we voted for it, and there were problems that have happened that I didn't expect. And by the way, for those of you who say, well, you should have read the bill, I did read the bill. And I've also read the Bible. Guess what? 2,000 years later, people are still killing each other over their interpretation of the Bible. You interpret a 2,000-page bill, you're going to have different interpretations. You get involved in a difficult, complicated law, it's going to have impacts you couldn't foresee. So yes, some of the things I knew were going to happen that I didn't like, and some things that happened that I didn't foresee. Guess what? You fix them. But we can't fix them now, because we have too many members of the House of Representatives in particular who have run on the promise of no compromise, only repeal Obamacare. They're not going to win that. Period. That doesn't mean we shouldn't find ways to fix what we can't agree on. It's not a book. There's no book you go to say, this is how you do it, and everybody sits down, holds hands, and come up with a wonderful healthcare system. It's a street fight. Just like it was, there's some people in this room that should be old enough to remember, I hope you remember, before Medicare. Probably nobody in this room old enough to remember before Social Security, so I won't use that one. But before Medicare, do you remember the fight it took to get Medicare? So many people think that Medicare and Social Security were like the 11th and 12th commandments. They were created by politicians, elected by Americans. They were fought over. They were called communist, socialist programs. And now pretty much every American I know would shoot me if I said we should repeal Medicare. They want to fix it, they want to expand it, they want to make it work. But I don't know anybody who wants to repeal it. Actually, I do. Some of the members of Congress. I don't know anybody in my district who wants to repeal it. And yet somehow we think, well, that's perfect. It was never perfect. Before this healthcare bill, a lot of my constituent work, it still is done trying to help people through the Medicare system. It's difficult, it's complicated, yet it's important. Don't look for simple solutions. You might find them on a 30-second ad, you'll find them on a little talk show where all the pundits who've actually never done this, or weren't very good at it when they were here, they'll get on TV and tell you everything we're doing wrong. Oh my goodness, when I was a member of Congress, life was perfect. I've been around long enough to have been in the good old days. Some of you guys remember the good old days. Were they really that good? I don't remember them being that good. I remember them being old. They were tough. They were hard. I think life is better today for our kids than it was for me. And I know my life is better than my father's. We're making progress. But it means people like you, people like me, have to stay at the game and keep pushing and understanding the realities that we face. And one last item, American history. I think if you're going to be in politics, you really have to know something about history. American history is full of time frames when nothing big happened. We tend to think that everything in the world that we know of, guess what happened? After World War II, from give or take 1950 to give or take 1980. Everything you think of as government happened then. Social Security, Medicare, the national transportation system, the encouragement for higher education, the encouragement for people to get a high school diploma, public housing for veterans, public housing for seniors, healthcare expansion. All those things you've taken for granted pretty much happened then. Stop and think about what life was like in America in the 1920s. None of the things you take for granted were there. There was no highway system. Route 1 was the highway system. And it wasn't a very good road then. It's still not a very good road, but it's a different issue. There are a lot of malls. So, I apologize, and again, if you don't like anything I said, don't blame Nikki, blame me, since most of you can't vote for me anyways. I got nothing to lose. I lose that tape. But I just want to end by welcoming you to Washington. My hope is that you go back. Obviously, you're here because you're interested. You're here because you're involved. But I also need you to be thoughtfully engaged when you are involved, to understand the pressures that Nikki and others go through on a daily basis, so that you can be effective advocates for what you're here for. Thank you all very much.
I'd like to take one question if anybody would like to hear.
I did. Uh-oh.
Well, given that you're on the Transportation Committee, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about your thoughts on air traffic safety, and NextGen.
NextGen is happening. NextGen is a way to, for those who don't know, it's a technological way for better radar and the like to make it easier for planes to be more efficient. And it's happening. It's happening in Boston. It's happening around the country little by little. It's expensive. Like everything else, it costs money to upgrade the system. I know at Logan, we have some of the system. We haven't got it fully implemented. But the truth is, here's an example. I was just at the tower at Logan over a month ago. The tower was built in the 70s. It's now too small for the equipment that's needed to be put inside, because they don't just take all the old equipment and throw it out. That becomes the redundant equipment. So they have to add new. That's just a very simple one item of what makes it difficult. Plus, it's expensive. And plus, each plane has to have equipment on it as well. Not every plane is equipped with it, and then the question comes of who pays for it. It's a typical program. It's moving forward. So, air transportation is fine. I mean, it's great. I fly every week. But, I think it's getting better. I know there are fewer planes in Boston, so my constituents over which they fly, most of them are happier. Kind of funny, the funny thing is that NextGen has actually made it so that more planes fly in a specific route. They have less width to fly in, so that it's a narrower route that they mostly land in, which of course has been fine for the people on the edges of the route, but not so fine for the people who are directly under the path of the more precise route now, which is another issue we're trying to struggle with. But that wasn't bad.
Thank you, Mike. Well, I say over and over again, I'm so glad that I am an elected member of Congress from Massachusetts, and Mike Capuano is an example of why I feel that way. It's a remarkable state that we're both so fortunate to come from. But now it's my honor to introduce Ted Leonsis. I'm so delighted that he could join us today because he is an extremely accomplished son of Lowell, Massachusetts. He's considered an internet industry pioneer, a high-tech titan, and a serial entrepreneur. He is the founder, chairman, majority owner, and CEO of Monumental Sports and Entertainment, which owns and operates the Washington Capitals, the Washington Wizards, and the most important team, the all-women Washington Mystics. His business career includes these remarkable sports ventures as well as leadership on a wide variety of successful online companies. He was a founder of AOL, Groupon, and is also an award-winning production, also has award-winning productions of independent films and documentaries. He has generously contributed and supported countless worthy causes, often getting personally involved in his philanthropic efforts. And I'd like to think that all of this success can be credited to his time as an intern for my husband Paul when he was a United States Senator. The other thing too that I just learned was that his godmother was a woman named Ellen Sampson who defeated Paul when Paul, well, not necessarily defeated Paul, but became mayor. When Paul sought to become mayor, and Ellen won. So lots of connections to Lowell, Massachusetts. His father was a Greek immigrant and his mother grew up in Lowell. He attended Lowell High School and has recently been inducted into Lowell High's Alumni Hall of Fame. He started his college career at UMass Lowell, came back to work at Wayne Laboratories after he graduated from Georgetown. And while he was at Georgetown, he was an intern in Paul's office. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that he even spent a term serving as mayor of the small town of Orchard, Florida. So I've really only scratched the surface on the many ways in which Ted's life has influenced and impacted each and every one of us. And I'm really looking forward to what he has to say today. Join me in welcoming Ted Leonsis.
So nice to be amongst friends and family from where I grew up. And I actually was born in Brooklyn, New York. And my mom and dad grew up in Lowell. They worked in the mills. With the rest of the family grew up in the acre. And my mother had 5 brothers, and she was the daughter, but she moved away. And to assuage her guilt, all of our vacations, we would come to Lowell. And I had to be the only person, when I came to Georgetown, people would say, where do you summer? And people would say the Hamptons. I'd say Lowell, Massachusetts. My neighborhood in Brooklyn was really, really tough. And my parents were very, very concerned about the environment that I was growing up in. And they tried to rescue me by moving back to Lowell. And so my junior year in high school, I came to Lowell. I lived at 185 Troll Lane East off of Vandover Street. Went to Lowell High School, and when I first graduated, started at University of Lowell. It wasn't called University of Lowell then, it was called Lowell State College. And Paul was running actually for Congress, and I volunteered to work in his campaign, and he won, and I decided that it would be a good move for me to transfer to Georgetown University. And for 3 years, I interned in Paul's office. And it was very, very seminal time for me. And I have to say that the majority of what I've been able to accomplish in my career, I can trace back to my mother and father honestly moving me out of New York and coming back to a hometown like Lowell. The work that I did on campaigns. And it was interesting that you noted my godmother, because she said to my parents, Teddy's going to be the first Greek president of the United States. And I remember my mother telling me that when I was young. And a couple of years ago, at a Mystics game, I was hosting President Obama and his daughters. And we were sitting together, and he said, "Oh, I know a little bit about you, and I bet ethnic home, I bet you growing up, your family wanted you to be President of the United States." And I said, "To be honest, they did. I served the term as mayor of my hometown, and I volunteered for Paul Tsongas." And he said, "Well, that's interesting, because when I was growing up, I wanted to own an NBA team." So it's very interesting to hear the congressman speak before about the double bottom line nature of the political system, and that what's happened in this city, because I've been here for a long, long time, and I feel like I'm a part of the city and its infrastructure, but I'm also trying to remain apart from it because of the gridlock and how sometimes the ability to get things accomplished is very, very difficult. And there's a group of business leaders who are very, very focused on creating what I call double bottom line endeavors. And there's also a movement around a concept called the rise of the rest. And I think Lowell can be positioned, and Lawrence can be positioned right in the middle, in the center of both of those movements. A double bottom line pursuit for a business is that you can do really, really well by doing good. I learned that in Wang Laboratories. People forget history, but Wang was the first populist technology company. When I first joined the company right out of college, its mission in life was to liberate women who were coming into the workforce from the drudgery of typing and filing, and to be able to unleash kind of the collective intellectual powers of the female workforce. That was really the higher calling of Wang Laboratories. And in my experience there, in fact in 1978, I went to a trade show for Wang Laboratories, and I met Steve Jobs. And I bought my first personal computer, and I had that in my apartment as we were launching the Wang Writer. I'll never forget the launch, the press conference for the Wang Writer, which was Wang's entry really into the personal computer business, was the day that John Lennon was assassinated, the day after. So we had to deal with that news. But Wang was a double bottom line pursuit. It was going to grow and do really, really well, but be proud of the outcome and what its product and its mission was. So around this concept of the rise of the rest, which basically says that this year, for the first time, more than 50% of all of the investment capital into innovation and high-tech companies will be east of the Mississippi. And we're seeing centers of excellence develop because of this angel network of investors, where great colleges and universities are graduating students in the sciences or who are studying math. High schools are more and more pushing AP classes and pushing people into the STEM services. And Lowell has this history, Lowell Lawrence, of being industrial. And when you look back, the mill operators, besides having to overcome bad press, that perhaps they needed to activate unions so that they would take care of the workers, they really were the first generation of creating globalization, of creating products and services that could be scaled en masse to bring around the world. That is our only advantage today as a country. The previous speaker talked about the great things that were created from 1950 to 1980. really the greatest thing that's been created and what's keeping us going as an economy is that our government created the web and the internet. DARPA, State Department, the infrastructure that's been invested, that platform in the early 90s really propelled this next generation of value creation for our country, job creation for our country. When we started AOL, our mission was, we had a higher calling, get America online. Started right here in Northern Virginia. And it was fascinating that when we first got onto the web, it was illegal. We were looked at as being hackers because the internet was a government transport system for information between military bases and the State Department and military bases and the Department of Defense. And somebody, Al Gore takes the credit, but somebody really had the vision to unleash and open the power of the web to entrepreneurs. And when I was growing up, my first job in the 70s at Wang Laboratories, living at my house, Boston, Lowell, they looked like the frontier for this next generation of technology innovation. Wang became the largest employer in the city by orders of magnitude. And we were all very, very proud of that. We saw that job creation really was the #1 driver of what we could do as a company. We stimulated the local economy. The Wang Towers became kind of the shining light of real estate development. The Hilton Hotel, I remember, opened. Is it still the Hilton Hotel? It's now owned by the university. It's fantastic. We spent lots and lots of time with the university to make sure that they continued, because it was called Lowell Tech. I remember the movement to change it to Lowell University, and I gave a little bit of input that said, I think you might have a branding issue. Lowell Tech is a great name. It's not Lowell Textile, it should be Lowell Technology. That's a perfectly position. The president of Lowell University was one of my classmates at Lowell State College, Marty Meehan. And Marty, as you know, served as congressman here, and we would meet lots and go to games. He would always buy his tickets, less than $50, so everyone was clear on it. And so I learned so much from the Greek Orthodox community in Lowell about faith and about family and about service. Paul Tsongas was a big part of that. I literally remember going to Greek picnics with Paul, raising money. And the Greek community was so proud of our congressman and then our senator. And to see Nikki now step into those shoes and to be able to provide this next generation of vision, grounded in all of the great things that our community holds. There's nothing like returning back to Lowell. Sadly, I get back funerals, weddings, and when we play the Celtics and the Bruins. Seems to be the pulls going back. But the friendships that I made in Lowell, Stephen Pangiotakis is very close to me. We're related. Sammy Hansis, and the list goes on and on. Evan Corvus, he's probably a dentist to somebody here. I've maintained really strong relationships with all of them. My cousins, mostly the Cuman-Zellis family. You go outside of Lowell High School, it's Cuman-Zellis Square. My Uncle John paid the largest price. He went into the Air Force Academy during the war. and lost his life in service to our country. Feeling that sense, every one of my mother's brothers was in the military, feeling that sense of service to the military. Today, right now at Verizon Center, we're holding a military job fair. We've brought together all of our sponsors, all members of our community. There'll be about 20,000 military members through that building today, and there's 200 companies who are there recruiting members of our military. And so I hearken back to all of the things that I feel to be true, all come back from my upbringing in Lowell and from my association with Paul and now with Nikki. So we're blessed. It's great that you're here in town in Washington, D.C., and I hope you'll have a fun, productive session here. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
What advice would you give Dan Schneider in terms of naming the name for the controversy over the Washington Redskins name?
I'm going to be like a politician and make a comment about something else. It was mentioned that I was given the award as the distinguished graduate alumni at Lowell High School. And I was kind of a C student, which I found interesting. And there were obviously giants that had been given the award. And my speech was around how C students could rule and hard work would overcome. And anyone here go to Lowell High School? My guidance counselor was a woman named Beatrice Ford. And my mom and dad didn't go to college, and so I was not very motivated, not as motivated as I am today during my high school career. And Beatrice Ford met my mom and dad in our one session, and she told my mom and dad that, you know, your son's really not college material, and he really should consider an occupation like working at Demoulas. And so honestly, my aspiration, I bagged groceries at Demoulas, and it was like to run the produce department at Demoulas off the road. In terms of what kind of advice do I give people, I've learned a long, long time ago that to thine own self be true, and that I have a world view about things, and trying to find the higher calling is indicative. I obviously would like to win a Stanley Cup. I obviously would like to win an NBA championship, and I'd like to sell a lot of tickets, and I'd like to get high TV ratings. But those goals pale in comparison to bringing the city closer together. I have a home in Nantucket, and this summer I spent some time with John Henry. And what the Red Sox did in that year of tragedy in Boston brought that community closer together and forged unbelievable lifetime memories between fathers and sons and mothers and daughters. I remember being on the couch when Bobby Orr scored the goal and the Bruins won the Stanley Cup, and the whole family screaming and hollering and hugging each other and crying. And so I try to focus on what's a higher calling and doing the right things the right way. And the thing about sports, like politics, we have elections every year. The team does well, and the media votes, and the season ticket holders vote, and the players vote, and we are the most accountable, have to be the most transparent occupation that there is. I remember, at AOL, we would launch a new product that would generate $4 or $5 billion in revenue and maybe create 2,000 or 3,000 new jobs and generate literally billions of dollars in tax revenue. And we'd launch it and we'd get an article in the Washington Post this big. And then the Caps or the Wizards would trade for a backup point guard. And it would be front page and sports section and the columnists and the like. And so I learned early on that the crucible of sports, just because we all have this relation to the passion play that's daily played out on the courts and on the ice, is much, much greater than the passion play around business. Thank you very much. Enjoy these.